Welcome to Eye on Africa. I'm Molly Hall. Here's what's coming up in the program. A landmark trial in Senegal. The former Chadian dictator Hissène Habré is convicted of crimes against humanity and sentenced to life in prison. Plus, we meet the eyes and ears of the United Nations in northern Mali. Our reporters join the Swedish unit whose intelligence gathering is central to the fight against terror. And it survived decades of war, but cheap foreign imports are causing Somalia's traditional textile industry to unravel. But first, Hissène Habré has been sentenced to life in prison. The former Chadian president was found guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and a host of other charges, including rape. Now, up to 40,000 people are believed to have been killed under Habré's 8-year rule. And this marks the first time ever the courts of one country prosecuted the former ruler of another for alleged human rights crimes. And this landmark verdict in Senegal caps 16 years of efforts by Chadian victims to bring the former dictator to justice. Our Nicolas Germain reports.
For years, victims of the Habré regime have supported each other in the Chadian capital. On Monday, many gathered around a television to watch the verdict being read out at the special tribunal in Dakar.
The court condemns you to life imprisonment.
It was a huge relief for the victims of the former Chadian ruler.
I'm really happy. I was a victim. They took me with my 1-month-old baby and put me in jail for 1 year and 7 months. I suffered a lot.
I'm so happy. Back then they tortured us. Thanks to God, we're here today. I'm very moved.
Habré is the first former president to be tried and sentenced by a special African court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. From 1982 to 1990, his regime killed an estimated 40,000 people. 200,000 others were victims of torture. On Monday, Habré, who's 73, was found guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, rape, forced slavery and kidnapping. His lawyers have 2 weeks to appeal the verdict.
For more on this story, we can speak now with Reid Brody from Human Rights Watch. Thanks for joining us here on the program. Firstly, of course, you've worked on this case for some 16 years, and you were in the courtroom for today's landmark judgment. Describe for us the moment the verdict was read.
Well, as the verdict was being read, one understood which way it was going, and so obviously we were more and more satisfied. I think when I heard that Hissène Habré was convicted of having raped a woman who I know very well, Khadija Hassan Zidane, that he was convicted of having personally raped her 4 times. It was clear, this was an immense victory for all the victims, for Khadija in particular, but for all of those who've been fighting for 25 years and never gave up the idea that one day Hissène Habré would be brought to trial.
Was there anything that surprised you in any way from today's events?
Well, I was actually surprised by how much we expected maybe more skepticism even from the judges. Habré's lawyers had really the court-appointed lawyers had gone after many of the survivors who testified, had tried to contradict their stories. And we figured maybe there would be some kind of mitigated verdict. I was not expecting the judges to give him a life sentence, to be honest. This is certainly what the victims were hoping for. But I had the feeling that because he was a head of state, because he was an old man, they might have tempered that. But I think the victims are certainly very happy with this verdict, as am I.
Well, of course, Hissène Habré has rejected this trial's legitimacy, and he now has 15 days to appeal. What do you think could come of that?
Well, of course, Hissène Habré himself doesn't recognize the tribunal, as you said, so the appeal would be taken by his court-appointed lawyers who don't take instructions from Hissène Habré. I don't see the verdict changing. The evidence was very strong. We had uncovered the files of Hissène Habré's political police, thousands of documents that really provide a roadmap to how Habré carried out the repression of the Chadian people. So I don't really see anything changing from this verdict.
Of course, the African Union has asked Senegal in the run-up to try Mr. Habré on behalf of Africa. Was it important to the victims that Habré be tried on the continent instead of the International Criminal Court?
You know, for the victims, to be honest, I think the idea was that he should be prosecuted. And of course, 16 years ago, he was indicted for the first time here in Senegal. And then when Senegal refused to go forward, the victims look elsewhere. They look to Belgium. We helped them file a case there. And had it not been for that and for Belgium's case against Senegal to the World Court, the International Court of Justice, this case never would have happened. But I think everybody's happy that Hissène Habré was tried here in Africa. It makes certainly his arguments about imperialism much harder. Of course, the fact is that Habré was prosecuted because of his victims, the people that you just saw on television. These people are not imperialist lackeys. They are people who decided to fight for justice and who never gave up.
Reid, Brody, thank you for joining us here on the program. We do appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
Next, in Mali, 5 UN peacekeepers were killed Sunday. The attack on the soldiers' convoy took place some 30 kilometers west of the centrally located town of Savare. No group has taken responsibility for the attack, but it comes 10 days after 5 MINUSMA peacekeepers were killed in an ambush in Kidal. Now, the UN is tracking armed units that signed a peace agreement with the government and groups that continue to target its forces. Our reporters met with intelligence officers stationed just outside Timbuktu.
They're the eyes and ears of the United Nations in northern Mali. Intelligence gathered by the Swedish contingent is central to MINUSMA's fight against terror.
We're flying over Timbuktu city, so it's a direct link with the image.
Drone flights account for over half the intelligence gathered by the Swedes. Their cameras track Abu Talya al-Azawadi's fighters. His Al-Qod group is close to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. There's also intelligence gathering on the ground.
Hi, how are things?
Fine.
There's been a series of attacks on a main route used for transporting merchandise. Traders are worried.
Each time you move out of town on the road between Timbuktu and Gundam, you just don't know if you're going to get there alive. Sometimes we're told the armed groups are carrying out the attacks, and sometimes it's bandits, sometimes terrorists. You just don't know what you're going to be up against around there.
The Swedish officers believe the attacks are linked to a turf war over desert trafficking. Their eye is on a town 60 kilometers from Timbuktu.
Beer is either the first location you reach upon traveling from the north, or the last one before you are heading out in the plain desert, more or less heading north. Whatever is traded along these trading routes is stretching from narcotics to guns, weapons, as well as normal merchandise.
The UN mission in Mali says the Swedes' contribution is crucial. Their mandate is likely to be renewed at the end of June.
Next, we cross to Somalia, where agriculture is the most important sector, accounting for roughly 40% of GDP. Well, textiles are also a key source of income for many, but in the wake of war, the country's traditional industry is beginning to unravel. Well, that's largely because of cheap foreign imports flooding the market.
It's a thread that ties generations together, but in Somalia, the industry of traditional weaving is fraying at the seams. Years of war made business difficult, and now handmade textiles are victim to cheap foreign imports.
I've worked at this for about 25 years. I inherited the business from my father. I've been faced with difficult times, bad times. Each month we produce 30 sarongs, selling them for $10 each. They aren't selling well.
Imported sarongs from India and China sell for half the price of locally made ones, and youngsters are also looking west for their fashion sense.
Us youngsters only wear clothes we see on TV and in films.
2 decades of fighting among warlords saw Mogadishu dubbed the most dangerous city in the world. An internationally backed government installed in 2012 has brought relative peace, though Shabab militants still carry out bomb attacks.
A cultural transition has taken place in the country, and local people don't want their own culture. There's psychological war against our culture. That war comes from abroad, and the media is playing a key role in that cultural transition.
Somali Enterprise has been given a new lease of life as wealthy Somalis return home amid an economic boom. But as the country's textile industry shows, sometimes progress comes at the cost of tradition.
Well, that's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. The news continues after the break. You're watching France 24.